The old school building stood silent and foreboding against the night sky. The moon cast an eerie glow on its dilapidated walls, revealing cracks and peeling paint. The school, long abandoned, had become the subject of local legends and whispered stories among the townsfolk. It was said that strange occurrences plagued the night class held there, and many students claimed to have seen apparitions lurking in the shadows. As the wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, and the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. 4 students, driven by curiosity and a sense of adventure, had decided to investigate the stories themselves. Mika, a sharp and perceptive girl with a keen interest in the supernatural, led the group. Her best friend, Yuki, a pragmatic and cautious girl, followed closely behind, always ready to debunk any supernatural claims. Kenji, the class clown with a fearless demeanor, and Haruto, a quiet but observant boy, rounded out the group. They had heard the tales from their classmates and read about the eerie incidents online, and now they stood at the threshold of the abandoned school building, ready to uncover the truth. Mika pushed open the creaking door, and the group stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay hung in the air. The flickering beam of their flashlight revealed broken desks, scattered papers, and remnants of the school's past. They made their way to the classroom, where the night class was said to have taken place. The room was just as they had imagined, desolate, with overturned chairs and a blackboard covered in indecipherable scribbles. The air felt colder here, and a chill ran down Mika's spine. "Do you feel that?" Mika whispered, her voice barely audible. Yuki nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. Kenji, always the skeptic, laughed nervously. "It's just an old building. There's nothing to be afraid of." But Haruto, standing by the window, felt something different. He had always been sensitive to the supernatural, and tonight was no exception. "There's something here," he said softly, his eyes fixed on a dark corner of the room. Suddenly, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the silence. The group jumped, their hearts racing. Mika's flashlight beam swung wildly, trying to find the source of the noise. But there was nothing. There, just the empty room and their own reflections in the broken windows. They decided to split up and explore different parts of the building, hoping to find more clues. Mika and Yuki took the first floor, while Kenji and Haruto headed upstairs. The old staircase creaked under their weight, adding to the tension. As Mika and Yuki moved through the hallways, they came across an old janitor's closet. Inside, they found a dusty journal, its pages filled with strange symbols and unsettling sketches. It seemed to belong to a former student, someone who had attended the night class. The entries spoke of shadows that moved on their own, whispers that echoed through the halls, and a presence that seemed to watch from the darkness. Mika felt a shiver run down her spine as she read the journal aloud to Yuki. "Do you think this is real?" Yuki asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mika nodded. "It's too detailed to be just a story. There's something going on here, and I intend to find out what." Meanwhile, Kenji and Haruto explored the second floor, where they found an old science lab. The lab was in a state of disarray, with broken glassware and scattered equipment. As they searched the room, Kenji noticed a door at the back, partially hidden behind a tall cabinet. "Hey, look at this," he called out to Haruto, who was examining a dusty textbook. They pushed the cabinet aside and opened the door, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. "Should we go down there?" Kenji asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. Haruto hesitated but nodded. "Let's see where it leads." The staircase led them to the basement, a place that seemed even more eerie than the rest of the building. The air was damp and cold, and the only light came from their flashlights. As they moved deeper into the basement, they came across an old storage room filled with boxes and old furniture. But something felt off. Kenji noticed a strange mark on the wall, a symbol that matched the ones in the journal Mika and Yuki had found. "What do you think this means?" Kenji asked, tracing the symbol with his finger. Haruto shook his head. "I don't know, but I have a bad feeling about this." Just then, they heard a soft whisper, like someone calling their names. They turned around, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. The whispering grew louder, and the air grew colder. "Let's get out of here," Haruto said, his voice trembling. They hurried back up the stairs and rejoined Mika and Yuki, who had just finished reading the journal. "We found something," Mika said, showing them the journal. Kenji and Haruto shared their discovery of the symbol and the whispers in the basement. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was unsettling. The night was growing late, and the group decided to leave the building and return the next night, better prepared for whatever awaited them. As they stepped outside the cool night air was a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere inside. But as they walked away from the school, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Mika glanced back at the building, her heart pounding in her chest. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The first night had been a warning, and she knew that the real danger was yet to come. The group parted ways, each lost in their thoughts about what they had experienced. Mika couldn't shake the feeling that they had stirred something ancient and malevolent. She knew that the night class held secrets that were better left undisturbed. But it was too late to turn back now. The stage was set for a confrontation with the unknown, and Mika could only hope that they would survive long enough to reveal the truth. The next night, the group gathered once more at the entrance of the abandoned school. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and rather with a life of their own. Mika, Yuki, Kenji, and Haruto stood silently, each lost in their thoughts about the previous night's unsettling events. The old school loomed before them, an imposing structure that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Mika took a deep breath and pushed open the creaking door, leading the way inside. The hallways were just as they had left them, filled with dust and decay. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the empty corridors, and the cold, musty air seemed to cling to their skin. They made their way back to the classroom, where they had found the journal, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Tonight, they were determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting. "Let's split up again," Mika suggested. "We'll cover more ground that way." Yuki nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Kenji and I will take the first floor. Mika and Haruto, you check the second floor and the basement." The group agreed, and they set off in their respective directions. Mika and Haruto climbed the creaking staircase, each step making the wood groan in protest. The second floor was just as desolate as the first, with broken furniture and scattered papers littering the halls. They began their search methodically, room by room, looking for any clues that might shed light on the mysterious happenings. In one of the classrooms, Mika found a stack of old photographs, yellowed with age. The images depicted students and teachers smiling and posing for the camera. But as she flipped through the photos, her heart skipped a beat. One of the pictures showed a shadowy figure standing in the background, barely visible but undeniably present. "Mika, look at this," Haruto called from across the room. He was standing by a window, looking out into the dark courtyard below. Mika joined him and peered outside. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the overgrown grass and abandoned playground equipment. But then, she saw a faint, ghostly figure moving slowly through the courtyard, its form barely discernible in the moonlight. "Do you see that?" Haruto whispered, his voice trembling. Mika nodded, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "We need to get a closer look." They made their way downstairs and out into the courtyard, their flashlights guiding their path. The ghostly figure was no longer visible, but the air felt charged with an electric tension. They moved cautiously, their senses on high alert. As they approached the center of the courtyard, a sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, sending a shiver down their spines. Mika heard a faint whisper, like someone calling her name. "Did you hear that?" she asked Haruto, her voice barely above a whisper. Haruto nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It's coming from over there," he said, pointing towards the old storage shed at the edge of the courtyard. They approached the shed, their flashlights illuminating the weathered wood and rusted hinges. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Mika pushed it open and they stepped inside. The shed was filled with old equipment and discarded furniture. But something felt off. The air was colder here, and the shadows seemed to move and shift on their own. As they explored the shed, Mika's flashlight beam fell on an old mirror, its surface covered in dust and grime. She wiped it clean with her sleeve, revealing a strange, dark stain in the center. The stain seemed to pulse and grow, spreading across the mirror's surface. Mika felt a sudden wave of dizziness and stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice shaking. Haruto nodded, and they quickly left the shed, the sense of unease growing stronger with each step. As they made their way back to the main building, they heard a loud crash from inside. They ran towards the sound, their flashlights bobbing wildly. They found Kenji and Yuki in the hallway, standing over a broken chair. "Are you guys okay?" Mika asked, her voice filled with concern. Kenji nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, just a little shaken up. We heard a noise and came to check it out. The chair just fell over on its own." Yuki looked visibly shaken, her eyes wide with fear. "This place is seriously haunted. We need to be careful." The group regrouped and shared their findings, the atmosphere tense with fear and anticipation. They decided to take a break and gather their thoughts, sitting in a circle on the floor of the main hallway. As they talked, Mika couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her eyes kept drifting towards the shadows at the edge of the flashlight beams, half expecting to see something lurking there. "There's definitely something here," Haruto said, breaking the silence. "I've felt it ever since we stepped inside." Yuki nodded. The journal mentioned shadows and whispers. "We experienced both tonight. What if the night class students were trying to communicate with us?" Kenji scoffed, but there was an edge of fear in his voice. "You really think we're dealing with ghosts? This isn't some horror movie." Mika looked at her friends, her mind racing. "We need to be smart about this. If there are spirits here, they might be trying to tell us something. Maybe they need our help." The group agreed to continue their investigation, but with more caution. They decided to stay together and move methodically through the building, documenting everything they found. As they explored the rest of the school, they came across more unsettling signs. In one classroom, they found a series of strange symbols drawn on the walls, similar to the ones in the journal. In another, they discovered a hidden room behind a bookcase filled with old, decaying books and strange artifacts. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, and the sense of being watched became almost unbearable. Mika felt a constant prickling on the back of her neck, as if unseen eyes were following their every move. Despite their fear, they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. In the basement, they found an old, locked door that they hadn't noticed before. The door was made of heavy wood and reinforced with metal bands, its surface covered in more of the strange symbols. Kenji tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "We need to find a way to open this," Mika said, her voice filled with determination. Haruto examined the lock, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It looks old. Maybe we can find a key somewhere." They searched the basement thoroughly, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. In an old filing cabinet, they found a rusty key that seemed to match the lock on the door. With a sense of trepidation, Mika inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and the door swung inward with a creak. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. The air was even colder here, and the smell of decay was almost overwhelming. They descended the stairs cautiously, their flashlights revealing a large, underground chamber. The chamber was filled with old desks and chairs, arranged in a circle around a central altar. The altar was covered in strange, dark stains, and more of the symbols were carved into its surface. Mika felt a wave of nausea as she approached the altar. The sense of malevolence almost palpable. "What is this place?" Yuki whispered, her voice filled with horror. Haruto examined the symbols, his eyes wide with fear. This must be where the night class took place. But what were they doing here? Kenji looked around, his face pale. This is some kind of ritual site. But why? And for what purpose? Mika's mind raced as she tried to piece together the clues. The journal, the symbols, the ghostly figures, they all pointed to something dark and sinister. She realized with a sinking feeling that they had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. As they stood in the underground chamber, a sudden, chilling whisper filled the air. The whisper grew louder, becoming a chorus of voices, each one filled with pain and despair. Mika's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around, trying to find the source of the voices. But there was nothing, just the darkness and the oppressive atmosphere. "We need to leave," Haruto said, his voice trembling. "This place is cursed. We can't stay here." The group hurried back up the stairs and out of the basement, the sense of dread growing with each step. They exited the school and stood outside, breathing in the fresh night air. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left them. Mika knew that they had uncovered only a fraction of the mystery, and that the danger was far from over. As they walked away from the school, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The night was silent, but the shadows seemed to move and shift, as if something was lurking just out of sight. Mika glanced back at the old school building, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. She knew that they had to return and finish what they had started, but the thought filled her with a deep sense of foreboding. The night class had left its mark on them, and Mika could only hope that they would survive long enough to uncover the truth. The days following their last visit to the abandoned school were filled with an oppressive sense of unease. Each member of the group tried to carry on with their daily lives, but the haunting memories of the underground chamber and the whispers that had filled the air lingered, casting long shadows over their thoughts. Mika, especially, found it difficult to focus on anything else. Her dreams were plagued by dark figures and indistinct voices, pulling her back to that eerie night. Determined to uncover the truth, she spent hours researching local legends and old records, hoping to find some clue that would explain the strange occurrences. One evening, while poring over a stack of old newspapers in her room, Mika came across an article that caught her attention. It was dated 20 years ago and detailed a series of mysterious disappearances of students from the very school they had been investigating. The article spoke of a secretive night class that was said to be held in the basement where strange rituals were performed. The school had been shut down shortly after the last disappearance, but no one had ever been held accountable. Mika's heart raced as she read the article. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. She quickly called Yuki, Kenji, and Haruto, urging them to come to her house. As they gathered in Mika's room, she showed them the article, her hands trembling with excitement and fear. "This explains everything," Mika said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The symbols, the voices, the cold air, it all makes sense now." Yuki's face grew pale as she read the article. But why would they do such things? What were they trying to achieve? Haruto, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "It sounds like they were trying to summon something, or perhaps communicate with the spirits. But whatever they were doing, it clearly went horribly wrong." Kenji, always the skeptic, frowned. "This is all just speculation. We need more concrete evidence before we can jump to any conclusions." Mika nodded. "That's why we need to go back. We need to find more evidence and put an end to whatever is happening there." The group reluctantly agreed to return to the school, each of them feeling a mix of fear and determination. They knew that this time, they had to be fully prepared for whatever awaited them. The night of their return was even colder than before. The wind howled through the trees, and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the abandoned school. The building seemed to loom larger in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes watching their every move. Mecca led the way inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the floorboards creaked ominously under their weight. They made their way back to the basement door, the sense of dread growing with each step as they descended the stairs into the underground chamber. The cold air enveloped them like a shroud. The altar in the center of the room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the symbols carved into its surface seemed to ray and twist in the flickering light. Mecca took a deep breath and approached the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to document everything," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. They began to take photographs and notes carefully, examining every inch of the chamber. Haruto found an old book hidden behind the altar, its pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. As he flipped through the book, he realized that it contained detailed instructions for the rituals that had been performed in the chamber. "This must be it," Haruto said, showing the book to the others. "This is what they were using." Mecca took the book, her eyes scanning the pages. "We need to be careful. If we're not, we could end up triggering something even worse." As they continued their investigation, the air grew colder, and the whispers began again, growing louder and more insistent. The shadows in the room seemed to move and shift, as if something was lurking just out of sight. Kenji, his nerves on edge, let out a startled cry as he felt a cold hand brush against his arm. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Mika nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to stay focused. Whatever is here is trying to scare us away." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. The altar in the center of the room began to glow with a dark, pulsating light, and the symbols carved into its surface seemed to come alive. Mika felt a wave of nausea wash over her as the room seemed to spin around her. "We need to get out of here," Yuki shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the voices. They turned to leave, but the door to the basement slammed shut with a loud bang, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they realized that they were not alone. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Mika gripped the book tightly, her mind racing for a solution. "We need to break the connection," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to destroy the altar." Haruto grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the altar, but the chair shattered on impact, leaving the altar untouched. Kenji and Yuki joined in, using whatever they could find to try and break the altar. But nothing seemed to work. The dark light from the altar grew brighter, and the air was filled with a sense of malevolent energy. Mika's eyes fell on the symbols in the book, and she realized that they needed to reverse the ritual. "Haruto, read from the book," she shouted, thrusting it into his hands. Haruto hesitated but nodded quickly, flipping through the pages to find the right incantation. He began to chant the words, his voice trembling, but growing stronger with each syllable. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, and the dark light from the altar flickered and dimmed. The shadows around them seemed to waver, as if unsure of their hold on reality. Mika, Yuki, and Kenji joined in, their voices rising in a desperate chorus. As they chanted, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift, and the whispers faded into silence. The dark light from the altar sputtered and died, and the symbols carved into its surface crumbled into dust. The ground stopped trembling, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The door to the basement creaked open, and a rush of fresh air filled the chamber. They stood there, breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We did it," Haruto said, his voice filled with relief. Mika nodded, her legs feeling weak beneath her. "We need to leave now." They hurried out of the basement and back through the dark hallways, the sense of dread slowly fading with each step. As they stepped outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief. The school, once a place of darkness and fear, now seemed strangely quiet and still. Micah looked back at the building, a sense of closure washing over her. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the memories of what they had experienced would stay with them forever. As they walked away from the school, Micah felt a sense of peace for the first time in days. The mystery of the night class had been solved, and the spirits that had haunted the old school could finally rest. But deep down, Micah knew that their encounter with the supernatural had changed them all. They had glimpsed a world beyond the ordinary, a world filled with darkness and mystery. And while they had triumphed this time, the shadows of the past would always be a part of them. The night was quiet, and the moon shone brightly in the sky, casting a gentle light over the town. Micah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. They had faced their fears and come out stronger, and she knew that they could face whatever challenges the future held. As they walked home, the bond between them stronger than ever. Micah couldn't help but smile. The night class was a part of their past now, but it had also shown them the strength and courage they had within. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together, ready for whatever mysteries awaited them in the shadows. The days that followed their last visit to the abandoned school were filled with a deceptive calm. Micah, Yuki, Kenji, and Haruto returned to their daily routines, but the sense of closure they had hoped for remained elusive. Each of them felt a lingering unease, as if the darkness they had encountered had followed them home. Micah, especially, found it difficult to shake the feeling that they had left something unfinished. Her dreams were still haunted by shadowy figures and disembodied whispers, and she often woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Determined to find the answers they needed, she called a meeting at her house one evening, urging her friends to come together one last time. As they gathered in Micah's room, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. "We need to go back," Micah said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "There's something we missed. I can feel it." Yuki nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I've been feeling it too," she admitted. "It's like there's a presence that won't leave us alone." Kenji, always the skeptic, sighed. "Are we really going to do this again? What if we make things worse?" Haruto, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "We can't leave it like this. Whatever we did last time, it wasn't enough. We need to finish what we started." The group agreed to return to the school, each of them feeling a mix of fear and determination. They knew that this time, they had to confront whatever was haunting them head-on. The night was darker than usual, with thick clouds obscuring the moon and stars. The wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie symphony that set their nerves on edge. The abandoned school loomed ahead, its silhouette a dark shadow against the sky. Micah led the way inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, and their footsteps echoed ominously in the empty corridors. They made their way back to the basement, the sense of dread growing with each step. As they descended the stairs, the cold air enveloped them like a shroud. The underground chamber was just as they had left it, but the atmosphere felt even more oppressive. The altar in the center of the room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the symbols carved into its surface glowed faintly in the dim light. "We need to find out what these symbols mean," Micah said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. Haruto took out the book they had found last time and began to carefully examine the symbols. "I think I found something," he said after a few minutes. "These symbols, they're part of a summoning ritual, but it's incomplete. We need to find the missing pieces." The group began to search the chamber, their flashlights revealing more symbols carved into the walls and floor. As they worked, the air grew colder, and the whispers began again, growing louder and more insistent. Micah felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that the shadows in the room seemed to move and shift, as if something was lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the chamber, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The altar in the center of the room began to glow with a dark, pulsating light. and the symbols carved into its surface seemed to come alive. "We need to finish the ritual," Haruto shouted over the noise. "It's the only way to break the connection." Mika, Yuki, and Kenji joined Haruto at the altar, their voices rising in a desperate chant. As they recited the incantation, the dark light from the altar grew brighter, and the air was filled with a sense of malevolent energy. The ground continued to tremble, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. Mika felt a wave of nausea wash over her as the room seemed to spin around her. But she forced herself to stay focused, her voice growing stronger with each word. As the final words of the incantation left their lips, the dark light from the altar sputtered and died, and the symbols carved into its surface crumbled into dust. The ground stopped trembling, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the whispers faded into nothingness. The door to the basement creaked open, and a rush of fresh air filled the chamber. They stood there breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We did it," Haruto said, his voice filled with relief. Mika nodded, her legs feeling weak beneath her. "We need to leave now." They hurried out of the basement and back through the dark hallways, the sense of dread slowly fading with each step. As they stepped outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief. The school, once a place of darkness and fear, now seemed strangely quiet and still. Mika looked back at the building, a sense of closure washing over her. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the memories of what they had experienced would stay with them forever. As they walked away from the school, Mika felt a sense of peace for the first time in days. The mystery of the night class had been solved, and the spirits that had haunted the old school could finally rest. But deep down, Mika knew that their encounter with the supernatural had changed them all. They had glimpsed a world beyond the ordinary, a world filled with darkness and mystery. And while they had triumphed this time, the shadows of the past would always be a part of them. The night was quiet, and the moon shone brightly in the sky, casting a gentle light over the town. Mika took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. They had faced their fears and come out stronger, and she knew that they could face whatever challenges the future held. As they walked home, the bond between them stronger than ever. Mika couldn't help but smile. The night class was a part of their past now, but it had also shown them the strength and courage they had within. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together, ready for whatever mysteries awaited them in the shadows. The group parted ways at the edge of town, each of them heading home with a sense of relief and exhaustion. Mika walked slowly, savoring the quiet night and the cool breeze that whispered through the trees. She felt a sense of closure, knowing that they had put the spirits to rest and ended the haunting. But as she approached her house, a sudden chill ran down her spine. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching her. Mika froze, her mind racing. The figure didn't move, just stood there, silently observing. Mika's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the haunting wasn't over. The darkness they had encountered still lingered, and it had followed her home. She backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving the figure. As she reached her front door, the figure vanished, melting into the shadows. Mika's hands trembled as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. Locking it behind her, she leaned against the door, her heart racing. The sense of closure she had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a new fear. The haunting had followed her home, and she knew that the battle was far from over. As she stood there in the darkness, Mika realized that she couldn't face this alone. She needed her friends, and they needed to confront whatever was haunting them together. She picked up her phone and called Yuki, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. Yuki listened, her voice calm and steady. "We'll come over," she said. "We'll face this together." Mika nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone. As she waited for her friends to arrive, Mika took a deep breath, steeling herself for the fight ahead. The darkness might have followed her home, but she was ready to face it. With her friends by her side, she knew that they could conquer whatever horrors awaited them. The night was still, the moon shining brightly in the sky, casting long shadows over the town. Mika looked out the window, her heart steadying as she saw Yuki, Kenji, and Haruto approaching. They had faced the darkness before and come out stronger, and she knew they could do it again. As they gathered in her living room, the sense of fear slowly dissipated, replaced by determination. They were ready to face whatever came their way. United by their shared experiences and strengthened by their bond, Mika took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The haunting was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would face the darkness and conquer the shadows. And this time, they would make sure that the spirits were put to rest for good. The night was quiet, and the moon shone brightly, casting a gentle light over the town. Mika knew that they had a long road ahead, but with her friends by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. The darkness might linger, but their courage and determination would guide them through. And together, they would ensure that the haunting was truly ended, once and for all.